Have you ever noticed how the most generous people often end up the most drained? They show up, they help, they give the benefit of the doubt, again and again. But beneath the surface of that kindness, there's an exhaustion that no one sees. The quiet fatigue of constantly letting others cross invisible lines. You don't notice it at first. It begins with a small compromise. A yes when you meant no. A reply when you needed silence. A smile when you felt unseen. And before long, you wake up realizing you're no longer living with people. You're surviving their expectations. This is the slow erosion of boundaries. And for intelligent people, especially those who've learned the hard way, this erosion is not just inconvenient, it's dangerous. Because every broken boundary chips away at your peace, your clarity, your center. And when you lose your center, even the sharpest mind begins to scatter. We live in a time where saying no makes you difficult, where being unavailable makes you suspicious, where the absence of constant reply gets mistaken for disrespect. But here's the truth intelligent people have come to understand. Not all silence is passive. Not all withdrawal is weakness. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not react, not explain, and not give away parts of yourself just to be agreeable. That's why intelligent people, the ones who value peace over popularity, clarity over chaos, build boundaries not as walls, but as quiet declarations of self-respect. They don't broadcast them. They don't argue to justify them. They embody them because they know something the world often forgets. A boundary isn't a line to keep people out. It's a sacred marker of where your values begin. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And in today's world, where noise is constant and access is demanded, boundaries are the last remaining proof that we still remember who we are. So if you've ever felt guilty for choosing peace over people-pleasing, if you've ever questioned whether protecting your time, your space, your inner quiet makes you cold or selfish, this video is for you. Because we're about to uncover 7 boundaries that intelligent people never break. Not because they're perfect, but because they've lived through the consequences of letting them go. And they've learned, painfully and patiently, that dignity is not something you negotiate, it's something you hold, even when the world around you keeps asking for more. Let's begin. Not everything that demands your attention deserves it, but in today's world, urgency has become the new currency of manipulation. Emails arrive with red flags, messages buzz with ASAP in all caps. A colleague suddenly throws their last-minute problem into your lap and calls it a crisis. And without realizing it, you've been trained to flinch, to abandon your priorities for someone else's poor planning. Intelligent people recognize this for what it is: emotional hijacking dressed as obligation. The modern world thrives on a manufactured sense of emergency. Platforms, workplaces, even friendships now operate like urgency machines, feeding on speed, not substance. But the Stoic mind understands, real power never rushes. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you seek tranquility, do less, or do only what's essential, and do it with clarity. Clarity cannot breathe when everything feels like a fire." And so, intelligent people begin to notice the difference between importance and pressure. They see through the manipulation hidden in urgency. If I make you feel guilty enough, you'll prioritize me. If I act frantic, I can override your boundaries. If I dramatize my need, I gain control. But wisdom doesn't obey noise. It obeys alignment. I once knew someone who lived in a state of constant response. Every beep, every buzz, every bold subject line sent them into action. They believed being responsive meant being responsible. But over time, they weren't more productive, just more exhausted. Burned out not by what they were doing, but by how fast they were doing it for people who didn't respect their rhythm. That's when they began to ask one powerful question before responding to anything. Is this urgent or just loud? That question became a filter, a mental boundary, a pause between stimulus and surrender. Because urgency isn't always real. Often it's a projection of poor planning, of ego, of someone else's addiction to immediacy. And the more you react, the more you reinforce the illusion that your time is disposable. But intelligent people know time is sovereign. Their attention is a resource, not a reflex. And so they stop rewarding panic with compliance. They stop apologizing for slowing down. They delay responses not out of rudeness, but out of self-respect. Because anything that truly matters will withstand the weight. Psychologically, urgency culture hijacks your nervous system. It shifts you into fight-or-flight mode, bypassing discernment and pushing you into reaction. But the Stoic doesn't flinch. They observe, they breathe, they pause, they prioritize based on value, not volume. And most importantly, they're not afraid to disappoint those who confuse access with entitlement. They don't match panic with presence. They don't validate disorganization with urgency. Instead, they choose the long view, because wisdom at its core is a slow burn, not a siren. So the next time someone demands your immediate attention, remember this. Urgency isn't always your problem to solve. You're not the fire brigade for everyone's chaos. Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, is this truly urgent or just the loudest voice in the room? And if it's the latter, let it pass. That's not neglect. That's mastery. Stillness, after all, is not the absence of movement. It's the refusal to be moved by things that don't matter. There comes a moment quiet, unremarkable, but life-changing when an intelligent person realizes this. Not everyone deserves full access to your energy. It's not an act of arrogance. It's an act of survival. Because when you spend your energy trying to be understood by those who only consume, trying to be liked by those who drain, or trying to stay available for those who show up only when they need something, you don't become more generous. You become less yourself. We've been conditioned to confuse constant availability with kindness, but intelligent people unlearn this. They recognize that generosity without boundaries becomes emotional bankruptcy. That's why, when they start to withdraw from loud rooms, draining calls, chaotic group chats, they no longer offer long explanations. They no longer apologize for choosing solitude over noise, recovery over obligation, or peace over performance. Because energy is not infinite, it's not passive, it's not meant to be scattered across every blinking notification or guilt-wrapped favor. Energy is currency, and smart people spend it with strategy. There's a term for what happens when you don't: emotional bandwidth theft. You don't even notice it at first. The slow leak that begins when you answer out of guilt instead of desire, when you stay longer than you want to, when you say yes just to avoid the weight of no. But the intelligent mind begins to feel it. The fog, the depletion, the inner tension of being everywhere but nowhere. And so they shift, quietly, subtly. They start missing a few calls, leaving some texts unanswered, showing up less in spaces that always demand but never reciprocate, not to be cold, but to return to equilibrium. The Stoics understood this deeply. Seneca wrote, "People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful." Time is energy in motion, and intelligent people stop apologizing for how they guard it. They stop saying sorry for not being on call to everyone's need. They stop explaining why they left the group, the party, the dynamic that once drained them. They stop defending the boundaries that protect their peace, and instead of lengthy excuses, they simply say, "I'm not available for that." Not harsh, not dramatic, just clear. This boundary, The refusal to apologize for self-preservation is what separates those who live on the edge of burnout from those who move with rootedness. Because if every ounce of your presence is up for negotiation, you'll slowly lose the power to choose yourself. Psychologically, the habit of over-apologizing is often tied to early emotional conditioning, the belief that love must be earned through self-erasure. But intelligent people confront this myth. They rewrite the script, and they no longer confuse silence with guilt. They learn that stillness is not an absence of care. It's the recalibration of it. So if protecting your energy offends someone, let it. If your absence makes them uncomfortable, let it. If your refusal to overextend is mistaken for distance, let it. That discomfort is theirs to hold, not yours to fix. Because when you stop apologizing for choosing peace, you begin to master the art of self-loyalty. And that kind of loyalty doesn't ask for permission. It just moves, quietly, wisely, without noise. There's a subtle betrayal that happens when you let emotions write your boundaries. And it almost always begins with guilt. Not the kind that screams, the kind that whispers, don't upset them, don't make it awkward, don't be selfish. And so you soften your no into a maybe. You explain more than you need to. You say yes, not because it's aligned, but because saying no might disappoint someone. This is how intelligent people lose themselves, not through recklessness, but through emotional negotiation. They feel empathy, and so they overextend. They feel fear, and so they over-explain. They feel shame, and so they overstay in situations that diminish them. But here's what they eventually learn, often through quiet regret. When your boundaries are decided by emotion, they are no longer boundaries. They are reactions. Emotion is temporary, but the consequences of a broken boundary are not. The Stoics teach us to observe emotion, not obey it. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And intelligent people begin to see that guilt, fear, or discomfort are not reliable compasses. They are weather, they pass, but a true boundary, it holds, even when your feelings wobble. This is not emotional detachment, this is emotional discipline, because maturity isn't about being numb, it's about knowing which feelings are valid and which are designed to make you betray yourself. I once knew someone who kept letting the same person back into her life, not because they changed, but because each time she tried to walk away, guilt pulled her back. What if they feel abandoned? What if I'm being too harsh? So she stayed, and every time she came back a little smaller, a little less sure, a little more tired, until she realized her boundaries weren't made of clarity. They were made of compassion she hadn't yet learned to aim inward. That was her turning point. The moment she chose to respect her intuition more than someone else's reaction. The moment she decided, my peace is not negotiable just because I care. And that moment changed everything. Intelligent people reach that point. They begin to sense when their feelings are being hijacked, when guilt isn't moral clarity, just emotional residue from people-pleasing. When fear isn't a warning, just an echo of childhood survival. When shame isn't truth, just someone else's voice embedded in your own. And in that space they choose, not based on mood but on value. They pause before they speak. They hold the line when it shakes. They leave when it would be easier to stay and explain. And they stop asking their emotions to be their moral compass. Because not every "I feel bad" means you've done something wrong. Sometimes it just means you've done something new, something unfamiliar, something that affirms your dignity. So if guilt appears when you set a boundary, let it. If fear rises when you say no, welcome it. If someone accuses you of being cold when you finally protect your energy, breathe and hold the line. Because intelligent people don't let emotions dictate what's sacred. They feel everything, but obey only what aligns. That's not cold. That's calibrated. Every time you justify your worth, you quietly question it, not out loud, not in a way the world can hear, but in the way you over-explain your decisions, overcompensate in conversations, or overstay in places where you've long stopped being respected. Intelligent people know this pain well. They've lived through the silent erosion of dignity that comes from trying too hard to be understood. At some point, they make a choice, a private, powerful choice. I will no longer negotiate my self-respect. That's the shift, the one that doesn't announce itself with drama or noise, but with silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for validation, the kind that no longer submits to spaces where you have to shrink to belong. Because respect, real respect, is not something you beg for. It's something you breathe in when you know who you are, and you refuse to twist yourself into someone you're not just to be liked. Psychologically, the compulsion to explain ourselves comes from an early pattern. The belief that being palatable is safer than being whole, that if we can convince others of our good intentions, they'll reward us with acceptance. But intelligent people learn, painfully and eventually, that no amount of explanation will change someone committed to misunderstanding you. I once knew a man who spent his whole life apologizing for his strength. He would soften his voice, round off his truths, add disclaimers before every boundary. Not because he wasn't clear, but because he didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. But that constant buffering made him smaller, less trusted, less respected, because the world doesn't honor what you constantly second-guess. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be one." And in the modern age where image is worshipped and assertiveness is often labeled arrogance, this quote lands like thunder. Intelligent people don't chase goodness through approval. They embody it, calmly, unapologetically. That's why they stop explaining their worth. They stop apologizing for saying no. They stop trying to prove that their boundaries are reasonable or nice. Because self-respect is not a customer service department. It's not open to negotiation just because someone feels inconvenienced. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop defending your value, people begin to see it. That's the unseen power of quiet self-possession. It confuses those who rely on your insecurity. It unsettles those who benefit from your over-justification. But it calms you, deeply, because nothing brings peace faster than the realization that your integrity doesn't need to be explained to anyone who truly sees you. From the lens of Stoicism, self-respect is not ego, it's inner alignment. It's knowing that your peace is not earned by compliance, but protected by conviction. That every time you stay silent instead of over-explaining, every time you walk away instead of pleading, every time you let someone misunderstand you, rather than distorting your truth, you return to yourself. So here's the shift. The next time you feel the urge to explain your boundary, don't. The next time someone calls your clarity rude, let them. The next time your silence is mistaken for weakness, smile. Because the moment you stop negotiating your self-respect, you begin to reclaim the power that was never meant to be shared. And that's not arrogance, that's sovereignty. There's a certain kind of chaos that doesn't look like a fight. It looks like conversation, a sly remark, a subtle jab, a message crafted just vague enough to stir your anxiety. And without realizing it, you're pulled in, defending, clarifying, responding, explaining. Not because it's necessary, but because you've been trained to believe that silence is defeat. But intelligent people, the ones who've learned how expensive attention really is, stop playing that game. They don't entertain drama loops. They exit quietly and completely. Drama is seductive. It disguises itself as relevance, as setting the record straight, as just being honest. But in reality, it's often a trap, a psychological sinkhole designed to hijack your energy and rewire your peace around someone else's dysfunction. And that's the first thing intelligent people see. Drama is rarely about truth. It's about control. I once watched someone try to bait a friend of mine into conflict. He sent paragraphs of accusations, half-truths, emotional barbs laced with faux concern, and the response? None. Just silence, stillness, no defense, no retaliation, no emotional reward. It didn't escalate, it collapsed. Because the drama was never designed to solve, it was designed to spiral. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus said, "Any person capable of angering you becomes your master." And drama thrives on your anger, your correction, your need to prove your side. That's how it grows, not from fact, but from reaction. That's why intelligent people step back. They ask themselves, is this conversation seeking clarity or chaos? Is this person inviting me to connect or to perform? Because not every message deserves a reply. Not every slight deserves correction. Not every comment deserves energy. And the more discernment you apply, the more peace you preserve. Psychologically, drama loops operate like a feedback trap, a narrative override injection. The more you engage, the more distorted the story becomes, and you become part of the play. But intelligent people learn to pause, to observe, to let the script unravel without casting themselves in it. This is not passivity, this is strategy, because silence, chosen with clarity, is not weakness, it's refusal, and refusal is power. From the outside, this might confuse people. They'll say you're cold, you're avoidant, you're unwilling to engage. But the truth is, intelligent people aren't avoiding truth. They're avoiding noise. They know that real resolution comes from self-mastery, not mutual escalation. So they adopt a new kind of boundary, not loud, not defensive, just still. They don't chase closure through arguments. They don't keep explaining to people committed to misunderstanding them. They don't give emotional currency to those who spend it recklessly. And when drama knocks, they don't open the door. They don't even walk toward it, because they've learned something most never do. Peace doesn't come from being right. It comes from being free. And sometimes freedom begins with the simple decision not to reply. So the next time someone baits you with vague hostility, unanswered messages, or passive aggression wrapped in politeness, ask yourself, do I need to win or do I want to be well? Because intelligent people don't attend every argument they're invited to. They know that some invitations are traps, and the only way to win is not to enter. That's not avoidance, that's elevation. Disrespect doesn't always arrive as a slap. Sometimes it's a smile that lingers too long after crossing a line. A just kidding that wasn't funny. A subtle eye roll. A repeated interruption. A promise broken. Not once, but often enough to become a pattern. And intelligent people know this. One-time behavior is a signal. Repeated behavior is a boundary being tested. They don't need a loud insult to recognize dishonor. They don't wait for chaos to validate what their body already feels. Tension in the chest, a tightening in the gut, slow withdrawal of their own voice. That's how disrespect enters. Not with a bang, but with erosion. And so intelligent people draw a different kind of line. Not after the 10th offense, but after the first pattern. Because they understand, tolerance when unchecked becomes training. The more you allow, the more you teach people what you'll silently absorb. And people learn quickly, not from your words, but from your thresholds. Psychologically, the repetition of disrespect operates like a trust hack feedback loop. Someone violates your space, then tests if you'll flinch. If you don't, they embed. If you do, but recover quickly, they adjust. Not to improve, but to hide. And so the cycle continues. Breach, justify, repeat. But the Stoics had no tolerance for this kind of moral erosion. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You should not give circumstances the power to rouse anger, for they don't care." And disrespect is a circumstance. It doesn't care if you're kind, if you're patient, if you meant well. It only cares about what you permit. I once spoke to someone who said, "I always forgive, maybe too easily." She wore it like a badge of honor, but her eyes told a different story. She was exhausted, not from grace, but from constant negotiation. Her relationships weren't built on respect. They were built on how much she was willing to overlook, and what she called forgiveness was actually erasure. That's what intelligent people learn to stop. They no longer tolerate apologies followed by repetition. They don't mistake charm for change. They don't confuse guilt with growth. They observe, they track, and most importantly, they act quietly, firmly, without the need to announce a boundary that should have been honored without reminder. Because here's the truth: when someone truly respects you, they don't need to be reminded of the line. They stay behind it, not out of fear, but out of regard. The rest, they test. And when they test, intelligent people don't debate. They disengage. This isn't bitterness, it's discernment. Because your time, your presence, your peace are not places for people to practice hurting you. So if someone keeps crossing the line, stop redrawing it. Stop rephrasing your limits to sound more digestible. Stop holding conversations with people who only listen until they're comfortable again. Hold the boundary and watch who respects it when it's enforced, not when it's explained. Because intelligent people know disrespect, once repeated, is no longer a misunderstanding. It's a message. And silence is not how you answer it. Distance is. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. There's a quiet kind of loneliness that no crowd can fix. It happens when you've been surrounded, but not seen. When you've agreed, performed, accommodated, just to keep your seat at a table you're not even sure you belong at. Intelligent people know this ache, the ache of self-abandonment in the name of connection. And one day they decide, I will not trade my integrity for inclusion. I will not lose myself just to be liked. Because here's the hidden cost of people-pleasing. Every time you edit yourself to fit in, you shrink. Every time you laugh when it's not funny, nod when you mean no, or silence yourself just to be nice, you chip away at the parts of you that feel real. And soon you're not connecting, you're performing, you're not belonging, you're blending, you're not being loved, you're being tolerated. The Stoics taught a different way. Epictetus said, know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly. In modern terms, don't shapeshift to be accepted. Be rooted so acceptance finds you as you are, not as you pretend to be. This boundary, the refusal to abandon the self for social comfort, is one of the most sacred, and intelligent people guard it fiercely, because they've seen what happens when you don't. You become agreeable but empty, visible but hollow, included yet internally erased. I remember someone telling me, I don't even know what I actually believe anymore. I've been adapting for so long, I've forgotten what my voice sounds like. That's what happens when approval becomes a habit, when fitting in is confused with being safe, when fear of rejection starts calling the shots. But intelligent people reframe rejection. They see it not as proof of inadequacy, but as a compass, pointing them back to where they belong. And they stop over-apologizing for their boundaries. They stop dimming their opinions to maintain harmony. They stop contorting into versions of themselves that feel palatable but hollow. Instead, they embrace the silence that follows a real no. They make peace with being misunderstood. They let go of connections that demand a watered-down version of who they are. And slowly they remember, if the price of inclusion is self-erasure, it's too expensive. Psychologically, this boundary is about presence, integrity, the ability to be in a room and still belong to yourself, to speak without performance, to disagree without guilt, to hold your truth gently but without shrinking. This kind of integrity isn't loud. It doesn't need to declare itself. It shows up in pauses, in stillness, in the look in someone's eyes when they say less, but mean more. And when someone asks more of you than you're willing to give, not materially, but personally, the intelligent person doesn't flinch. They don't over-explain. They don't justify their authenticity. They simply hold the line, even if it means standing alone. Because they understand, if being accepted requires you to abandon yourself, you are never accepted, only edited. And in a world that rewards conformity and labels honesty as rebellion, choosing to stay rooted in your true self is the quietest form of revolution. That's not detachment. That's devotion to who you are when no one's watching. You've made it this far. That means something. Not because you watched a video, but because something in you recognizes the quiet cost of broken boundaries. The exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from being too available, too agreeable, too afraid of disappointing people who never really considered your limits sacred. That's the hidden war intelligent people learn to walk away from. Not with fury, not with declarations, but with stillness, with restraint, with the kind of grace that no longer apologizes for taking up space or for protecting it. Because boundaries are not barriers, they are filters. They don't shut the world out. They keep your peace in. And when you stop breaking the lines that protect your values, you don't become rigid, you become real. The Stoics never used the word boundary, but they lived it. Every morning, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to expect interruption, insult, impatience, not to become bitter, but to become immovable in his purpose. He didn't react. He didn't absorb. He didn't stray from the fortress of his own clarity. That's what you're building when you choose to honor your non-negotiables. Not a wall, a compass. Not isolation, alignment. So if any part of this spoke to you, let it settle. Let it rewire the part of you that thinks being generous means being boundaryless. Let it heal the belief that stillness is selfish, that no is too sharp, that being misunderstood is failure. It's not. It's freedom. Because the more intelligent you become, not just intellectually, but emotionally, the less willing you are to let others write your schedule, shape your identity, or assign meaning to your worth. And the more at peace you become, the more disruptive that peace feels to people who relied on your compliance. So be it. You don't have to match their chaos to prove you care. You don't have to argue to prove you're right. You don't have to bleed emotionally to earn space. You just have to stay anchored, in truth, in restraint, in the quiet, knowing that your boundaries are not a punishment to others. They are a promise to yourself. And intelligent people, they keep that promise, gently, consistently, without noise. If this spoke to you, not just as content, but as confirmation, then pause here and let that recognition land. You're not wrong for wanting more space. You're not difficult for needing distance. You're not broken for refusing to explain your boundaries to people who trample them. You're becoming clear. And clarity doesn't always feel peaceful at first. It often feels like loss, but the kind of loss that finally gives you room to grow. So if you've ever sacrificed your time, your silence, your comfort, just to keep others comfortable, leave a quiet signal in the comments below. Just write, "I protect my peace." That's it. No explanation needed, just a whisper, a declaration, a boundary drawn in stillness. And if someone comes to mind, someone who's constantly apologizing for choosing themselves, someone who's been drained by giving, someone who thinks saying no means they failed at kindness, send this to them, not as advice, not as a fix, but as a quiet offering, a mirror. And if you're ready to go deeper, into the guilt that keeps us soft when we need to be sharp, into the social scripts that teach us to say sorry just for being real, then you won't want to miss what's next, because in the next video, we'll explore this question. Why do intelligent people stop apologizing? Not because they've stopped caring, but because they've started respecting the truth more than approval. Because they've learned that self-respect begins where over-apologizing ends. If you're ready for that shift, if you're tired of shrinking yourself with every sorry that's not truly yours to carry, meet me there. Until then, walk slow, breathe deep, and above all, protect the peace you've worked so hard to reclaim.